afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this episode of Inside Austin's Agenda. I'm your host, Grace Reeder, and today we are joined by Councilmember Paige Ellis, who is now, after an election, one of the most senior members of Austin City Council. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode, Councilmember Ellis. So first, can we talk a little bit about, we have 3 new members. It sounds like you had lunch with one of them today. We've got 3 new members on the dais now. Talk a little bit about sort of back, years ago when you first started the council. Was there anything that surprised you or any tips that you're sharing with these new members?
Well, I think one thing that's surprising for folks is that when council members come onto the dais, we usually walk into our office and we don't quite know exactly where everything is. So we have the same first day jitters that anybody else would have coming into office. It's a big transition to switch from campaigning to leading and serving your constituents. So I've been very impressed by all 3 of my new colleagues, and I look forward to the work that we're going to get to do together.
Was there anything that surprised you early on when you first started in this role?
How many departments there are to learn. They call it drinking from the fire hose for a reason. Yeah. So you know the issues that you want to work on. For me, that was going to be transportation and parks. I care about those issues deeply, but there's public health, there's criminal justice, there's dozens and dozens of departments to be able to work on, and so it's a lot to learn, and it's really, really hard to make sure you can focus on the ones that you care the most about. It's easy to get distracted and to try to work on every problem, but we have to work together as a council and pick and choose who is best to lead on those issues and who really needs to make sure that we are pushing the work and getting the good things done.
What are you seeing so far from these new council members and what their priorities might be and where they might fit into this puzzle?
I see a lot of passion. Krista Lane was the first one that I met with, and she obviously is very passionate about education and school districts. There's actually a lot of wraparound services that the City of Austin provides for school districts. She cares a lot about regional transportation, so she wants to make big impacts on ways to make her community better, more educated, and safer in regards to regional transportation. Mark cares a lot about wildfire risk. He cares a lot about public safety and homelessness services, and he even mentioned he wants to look into creative arts and look at how we do our grants funding, which programs are most successful, and to really dig into that. It was something that he mentioned wasn't necessarily on his list, but as he talked with people and learned more about it, he said he was very excited about that. And then I just had lunch with Mike Siegel. So he is someone who's not new to City Hall, but new to being a council member. And he wants to look at how he can do more jobs creation, specifically around climate impacts. How do we make sure that we have an educated workforce to do big things in our community? How can we support local industries and work on things that will better our climate? So I think people are coming in with a ton of energy right now.
Talk a little bit about what your priorities are going into this new year.
Well, I still love working on mobility and parks. Those are the lanes that I've always wanted to occupy. They are really important for my district, District 8, which is Southwest Austin. I have Zilker Park. I have a lot of the Greenbelt trails and a lot of the communities that move further south and further west. So we care a lot about those issues. We care about wildfire risk. Those are the main issues I want to lead on. And surprisingly, a resolution that I have on for City Council to consider next Thursday is about sustainability and development goals. So it looks at the United Nations framework and tries to help make sure that our city's staff is in line with sustainable development. Whether or not the federal government participates in some of these goals is up to them. But we want to make sure that we're espousing those values at the local level and doing what we can to make good things happen for our constituents.
So break that down for me a little further, if you wouldn't mind, kind of in layman's terms for folks who haven't been following along. What does that mean for people at home?
So the Sustainable Development Goals were something that the United Nations has worked on. I think about 10 years ago is when they began the process. It covers topics ranging from infrastructure to poverty, food accessibility. There are sections about life above water, life on land, and life below water. We know that our oceans are being impacted by climate change. Everybody here went through the freeze that we're happening right now. We're trying to get out of these really, really cold temperatures. We know it's been freezing overnight. I stayed home for 2 days and did all my work remotely so that I stayed off the roads. But as we continue to see these big freezes every 2 years, managing wildfire risk, obviously we've been putting our focus and attention on our folks out in California and the Palisades fires that have been going on. We have to make sure that we're climate resilient, and when you look at how things are impacting the entire globe, we don't get to do it just City of Austin. We have to look at regional impacts, and we have to understand that we're all in this together. We are sharing the same earth, and we have to be practical about how we set our goals up.
So you all have your first city council meeting of the year next week, and it sounds like there are going to be some wildfire agenda items on that agenda, and talking about some mitigating some risk. Can you talk a little bit about what you all kind of hope to do next week when it comes to that? I think that's really top of mind for people, obviously, right now.
Absolutely. So one of the contracts that we have coming to us is about vegetation management, trimming trees, making sure that underbrush is appropriately maintained. Those are some of the issues that we know are first and foremost for a lot of neighbors that live adjacent to city-owned land, maybe something that the Parks Department purchased or other wildland-urban interface areas. The risk is real. Luckily, we have a lot of great programs already in existence to help educate people on how to make their home more resistant to wildfire risk. But a lot of folks don't know where those resources are, so we want to make sure that we're sharing those. We're also listening and learning from other communities. We've done a couple of lunch and learns with firefighters from other regions that have been on the ground in real time trying to solve these issues. And our wildfire mitigation forces have been studying with those folks for a long time and learning their best practices. So we want to make sure people know about this, but we also want to make sure that we have the funding to continue to be better and better, because we've got a great fire department and they want to do everything they can to help keep neighbors safe.
We know that Austin is one of the cities outside of California that is of great risk of a catastrophic fire. What are some of those things that you're kind of hearing from outside communities that might be something that we're seeing down the road?
Well, what's really, really hard is seeing our neighbors, even adjacent cities outwards like Bastrop, having to go through these issues. We've had issues in Steiner Ranch and the Oak Hill area where we had real wildfires popping up in neighborhoods, popping up on the side of the road. A discarded cigarette butt, a chain dragging on a vehicle is enough to start a wildfire. And that can carry and have lasting impacts for a bunch of neighbors nearby. So that's really, really worrisome. We've gotten a bunch of questions from folks about what is the city doing or what can a homeowner do to help protect their property. But we definitely want to make sure we are working in concert with our surrounding communities and sharing the resources, a lot of them already exist, to be able to get the information to folks that they need. An interesting thing about the way that our fire and EMS services are structured is that we have these interlocal agreements to be able to go outside City of Austin boundaries and go help wildfire issues in other areas. And the same thing is brought back to us, where if something happens inside the City of Austin limits, those adjacent fire departments can come into our area and help add our person power into our wildfire fighting capabilities.
I know that you have had some resolutions too. Some folks are coming in fresh, but you have resolutions that are carrying over as well into this year. What are some of those things that you passed specifically kind of in December? I'm thinking about, the MOPAC South expansion resolution that you had. What are some of those things that you're trying to bring into the new year and highlight?
So I have two really big ones. One is about the MOPAC South expansion. A lot of folks know the extra toll lane that was added to North MOPAC a couple of years back, and there has been one slated to come onto South MOPAC for a while now. South MOPAC is definitely feeling its growing pains. We're trying to make sure we can manage the traffic that exists. The resolution that I brought asked staff to be more mindful of where our Project Connect focus lied. We wanted to see a park and ride down in Southwest Austin. We wanted to make sure that we had a Metro Rapid out in the Oak Hill area. There's already a park and ride at Pinnacle, but we're trying to make sure that the CTRMA who's building that project, our city staff, and Cap Metro are having this conversation because we don't want to miss the boat. Another one of my resolutions that is almost wrapped up but not quite is Site Plan Light, and that is about an easier permitting process for missing middle housing. So this doesn't change any zoning. It just looks at lots that already have the missing middle types of zoning and says, you're a little bigger than a single family home, but you're not quite as big as a big multifamily apartment like I live in. How can we find some middle ground and make sure that these 5 to 16 unit types of builds are easier and cheaper and faster to be able to build?
One of the other things I saw come out of the city was talking about short-term rental regulations finally, and that kind of came out of nowhere for me. The city said all of a sudden, we really want to overturn the regulations that we have and move them into a new part of our code, and that's going to be, I think, a really robust discussion that you all have pretty early. Where do you kind of stand with that so far, and what do you expect that conversation to look like?
Well, the short-term rental conversation has been really tedious and a bit difficult. I don't think that's a fault of any one individual. We've seen that what the legislature has proposed for short-term rentals oftentimes is different than what our constituents have been asking for. So we're looking at making sure that our laws are in compliance with every court ruling that's happened and obviously what state law says. And the new shift is going to make sure that short-term rentals are more in line with your standard business license rather than any sort of use type of regulation. So we're trying to look at who's owning them, how do you maintain that license. Short-term rentals have to collect hotel occupancy tax, which is a source of funding for the city, and we just want to make sure that we're collecting the appropriate taxes to be able to provide services that impact tourism. There is creative arts funding and homelessness services that is funded out of hotel occupancy tax, and those are things we know that we want our constituents to be able to have the benefits that they deserve out of this. So we're just trying to be creative and really look at all the angles and to get a good outcome. We know that this is really tough for neighbors. There's a lot of noise complaints and nuisance issues, and we're just trying to make sure that we can make good neighbors. Good fences make good neighbors, right?
Right. This is one that we hear about a lot from folks as well. What do you expect kind of that public engagement period to look like, and what do you hope that folks come out and talk to you all about?
Well, there will be multiple public input processes. So the City Council and Planning Commission are going to do a joint hearing together on February 4th in the afternoon. So there's going to be a couple different boards and commissions that take this item up and really help us understand what those regulations are. And we definitely want to hear from people because it's probably every day or at least every week that we're getting an email or a phone call from a constituent saying someone is running an unlicensed STR and they're making noise at 3 a.m. and my dogs are barking. I had one gentleman, Glenn, that I met in 2018, and he ended up moving. He could not deal with the STR that was next to him. It was unlicensed, and he couldn't deal with it. He moved, and it was very sad for me because he didn't want to have to do that.
Have you all spoken to any of those short-term rental companies? Will they be brought into the conversation at later points to kind of talk about their perspective and how they can help the city regulate these and get folks to comply?
Our housing and planning staff is in regular communication with the folks that work with those companies. We will definitely make sure that they are talked to on a personal level to make sure that these are workable. But I've oftentimes found when there's an issue to address that they have been responsive and they want to be good team players as well.
So moving on a little bit, talking a little bit about, you brought up the state rules and regulations specifically surrounding STRs, but we obviously know that the state is back in session right now, and Austin City Council is very often responding to what the state is doing, responding to what the federal government is doing. Do you anticipate that this year there's going to be a lot of kind of responding to what state and federal government is doing?
Well, we're definitely always on the watch of what's going on at the state legislature and the federal government. We've seen our council dais get more and more progressive and more creative with the way that we're trying to solve problems for our constituents. I know our Central Texas delegation is always fighting for us at the state legislature. We'll just have to see what those issues are. A lot of people are filing bills right now, so we're trying to keep our eye on which bills those are. How likely are they to move forward? We do have a new intergovernmental relations officer, and so I look forward to being able to work with her and really see how we can work through this. We're fortunate that we have a number of people on the dais that have worked in the legislature, our mayor included, as a state senator, but a number of other folks that have been legislative aides, and so I think our knowledge over the years has expanded.
talk a little bit about sort of in responding to the state on housing. I think housing is one of the things that they're really talking about and actually looking to the city of Austin on because of what the city of Austin has done. What can the city of Austin provide to the state in terms of sort of guidance on what we have done here?
Oh, I think what you typically see is this, property rights conversation is how I would frame it. And property rights conversations don't necessarily have one political party. Housing is one of the main issues that you see the council dais split on most commonly. That's the one where people kind of care about what's your perspective or how do you perceive, the solutions to the issues that we're trying to solve here. So I can't say exactly where the ledge would be on some housing issues, but property rights is usually how are they talking about it and in which way do they think property rights apply?
I'm going to take a hard shuffle away from the legislature. I'll save you on just moving away. We'll move away from the state legislature and the federal government here. And want to congratulate you on, now that Kadri, he got COVID last year, so that means that you were the only council member that showed up to every meeting in person and not on Zoom. So, as you know, we started doing the city council attendance tracker, and so you kind of unanimously showed up to all of the council meetings, and so when we start doing that for 2025, you have the best attendance record. So congratulations on that, and I'm sure Zoe doesn't love that call out.
Sorry, Zoe. I'm sorry.
But is there anything kind of going into this next year, with attendance, with priorities, that you want to make sure that your constituents know, that you want to make sure that folks are prepared and aware to know is coming?
I would just say there's a lot of great energy coming into the city council. I think the world is our oyster at this point. Yeah. There's so many things that we can do to work together. I think there's going to be a lot of collaboration. But I do want people to know that our teams work very hard. A lot of council members have 4, 5, or 6 people working with them. And so I hope that they're getting everything they need out of their council member. The longer the meeting is, the harder it is to make sure we're available to help work with our constituents. But that's what we're here for. It is tough work we signed up for, and we're happy to do it. But at the end of the day, as long as I am trying to solve problems for the people I serve, that's where I'm happiest.
And for folks who, this is something that I hear a lot as our city council reporter, and something you kind of touched on. I hear a lot of folks say, do city council members really listen to me when I show up and talk to them? Do they really hear me? Can you address that a little bit, and kind of just when folks come up there and talk to you, how much you all really take that into consideration?
We do. And I know, like I said, the longer the meeting is, the harder it is to sit in one spot for that many hours. But the truth of the matter is there's a lot of folks that are taking time out of their day. They're taking time off work to come and speak to us. I make it a point to make eye contact and really let people know that we care, that they're coming and showing up to speak to us. And there are absolutely words and phrases people will put into their testimonies that carry with us. And that's really what I think this is all about, is, being of service to the people. And it does matter that you show up. We love to see new faces even. We love when we see a new person show up. And even if you seem nervous, we always say, you did a great job. Your voice matters. Your minutes to talk to us are as important as other folks. And we want to make sure that folks are being heard. We're also seeing that people come and speak at City Council are oftentimes high school students or they're college students. And that is something that is really great to see, because the government is for you, it works for you, and it should be serving you and solving your issues for you.
Well, and for folks who have never gone and done that before, it can be scary, but we do have an article over at kxan.com about how folks sign up and when they need to sign up and such. So if you do have interest in doing that, we've got details on how you can over at kxan.com. Councilmember Ellis, before we wrap up here, is there anything else that you want folks to know or wanted to say?
Oh, I would mention one thing you didn't ask.
Yeah.
This dais has new committees that are being formed. And so some of the work that we get to do has been revolved around mobility, public health, our utilities, audit and finance. But now we have a climate and parks committee, which is one of the biggest conversations I think we're going to be having over the next year, and one about economic opportunity. So a few of my other colleagues decided to start this, and I think there's going to be some really interesting new conversations going on. So even if you've been watching City Council for years and you think you always hear the same thing, be on the lookout, because there's new exciting topics coming, and I think this is a great new chapter, and I'm excited for these 2 years.
Well, Councilmember Ellis, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate your time. Appreciate you taking the time to do this format in particular, where folks get a little bit more time to be able to hear from you at a more personal level, a bit of a longer format. Appreciate you doing this.
Happy to join you.
Thank you. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Inside Austin's Agenda. We do this every other Wednesday at 3 p.m. We'll see you next time.